This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Atom Audio, Isotope, Native Instruments, and Grace Design. You're hearing my voice right now through the Grace Design M201 Mark II mic preamp into the Empirical Labs EL8X distressor mixed through Isotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, and Nectar, all on Atom Audio monitors. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. It's a great way to help support this show, and we really appreciate it. Now, get ready to rock.
You mix on a system like I've got here, but then when it's played back in the consumer world, it adapts to what's available. If there's a 3.1 system available, it will spread itself out on that. If it's a Sonos Era 300 with multiple speakers inside a box, it will adapt to that. More speakers starts to equate to more resolution. Then you really start to get it, completely immersed in it.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. No matter what style of music you create, Native Instruments provides you all the instruments you need, from drums, loops, and beats to vintage and modern synthesizers, realistic strings, guitar amps, and futuristic synth pads. I really enjoy recording real bands in my studio, but then adding amazing overdubs from Contact, Massive X, Super 8, Battery, Guitar Rig, or Hybrid keys. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get complete start for free today with a bundle of 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com. Are you struggling to make your mixes sound professional? If your tracks feel weak, distant, or lack punch and clarity, I've got the perfect solution. My free course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will teach you how to achieve pro-level mixes from your home studio using free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. But these techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you use Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or another. If you're ready to make your best record ever, go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started now for free. Find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Matt Boudreau, a very successful audio engineer, Atmos mixer, producer, drummer, and podcast host. I often call Matt my brother from another podcast as the host of the awesome Working Class Audio podcast, where he also conducts interviews with producers and engineers about life in the studio, but often more focused on work-life balance for the working audio professional. Matt has been a guest on Recording Studio Rockstars a couple of times already, so you can check out his backstory on episode RSR472 when we actually met for the first time, and then again on RSR472 when Matt taught us all about mixing with drum samples. Today we're going to talk primarily about mixing because after 28 years, Matt now focuses on mixing and mastering in both stereo and Dolby ATMOS, which is immersive spatial audio. In fact, Matt mixed 2 of the songs on my recent record, Skadoosh, which is the music that you hear in the bed of my podcast as well. He mixed 2 of the songs in Atmos, which you can hear in the show notes, along with the other great works from his discography. So please remember to scroll down and go listen to Matt's records, probably after you listen to the podcast, or if we reference something and you want to check it out real quick. Matt Boudreau is based in the San Francisco Bay Area, but works with people from all around the globe. Whether you're a self-funded artist or a major label artist, Matt is there to help you finish a record that you're going to be proud of, literally in all directions through immersive audio. So I like to always thank who introduced us. So in this case, I'm going to say actually thanks to iTunes search function and finding Working Class Audio one day as I was driving around listening to other audio podcasts. nearly 10 years ago for making our original introduction. So thank you, Apple. Please welcome back to the show, Matt Boudreau, to Recording Studio Rockstars. Matt, my brother from another podcast. Are you
What's
ready
up?
to rock, dude?
Oh, you know I am.
Dude, it's good to see you. I can't pretend like I haven't seen you in ages because, of course, I see you all the time.
I see you all the time, and I talk to you like weekly.
That is true, Rockstar. So I'm not kidding when I say Matt is my brother from another podcast. We sort of teamed up as fans of record making and podcasting many, many years ago. And then we've just bounced ideas off each other. We started a mastermind group together 10 years ago at this point. And it's...
Wait, you're crediting me with starting that?
I mean, I started it, but I mean, once you were in, then it really started.
Well, I mean, you started it, you invited me to it, and I just stuck around.
Well, I'm glad you're there, dude. Maybe we should start with that for a sec. What's a mastermind group and what do we do?
You know, I think a mastermind group is what I would call a peer accountability group. It's a group of people who, in our case, meet once a week in a structured environment where we give each other, a small chunk of time to kind of talk about what's good in the week, what's bad in the week, and things we might be challenged by or stuff we might need, our advice from our peers on. And it's, I have to say, it's been a very important part of my life since I joined. And in spite of the fact that I have to get up at 5:45 in the morning,
it's insane how early you have to get up.
Being in Pacific time, I'm on the call at 6 a.m., coffee ready to go, ready to talk to my friends and, get inspired. I think it's had a huge impact on my life.
Do you have to actually go to bed early on a Thursday night to be ready?
Well, I tend to go to bed early these days anyway. Like I'm probably in bed by like 8:30, 9.
Wow,
9:30.
dude, that's impressive, man.
But I mean,
I always feel like I should go to bed that early, but I never do.
Now I say that, but I'm actually sitting there with my AirPods on and my phone or my iPad, either watching a show or looking at YouTube or, watching Masterclass or Mix with the Masters. Like there's something I'm doing.
Yeah.
And eventually my eyes start to droop and I just fall asleep with the phone in my hand.
Now, do you think you're somebody who used to watch things just for pure entertainment story value, and now you watch things that are kind of educational? Or do you think you always watched stuff that was a mix of education and story?
I think currently I watch things for both. Like I'll latch onto a show and, we'll watch that. Like depends on when, like do I binge it? If all the episodes are available, like I'll binge like 2 or 3 episodes in a night. But occasionally I don't feel like being entertained. I feel like being educated. So that's when I'll go to, YouTube. Like I do photography as a hobby. And so I spend a fair amount of time on YouTube looking at other photographers and doing camera reviews and stuff like that.
It's funny. I've known you for so long and I don't think I really knew that about you.
Yeah.
Do you go out and actually just snap photos and just take pictures and try and get good, well-framed photos for fun?
Yeah. Yeah. Plus I take, one of my kids is on a lacrosse team and I'm the team photographer. So
did you get yourself because I went through that being a soccer dad, and after years and years, I still never just put the money down on a telephoto lens.
Oh, no. I have a couple.
Yeah. So you kind of have to. It's like if you want to do film set audio recording, you're going to have to get yourself a shotgun mic.
Yeah. I mean, you get the gear that you need to do the job. And I'm actually trying to put into practice some of the things I deal with in audio and deal with cameras. I'm going to, after I get off this call with you, I'm buying a new camera. And then I'm going to take one of my older cameras that I just feel is becoming not obsolete, but obsolete to me once I get this new camera. And I'm going to sell that.
You've always been good at that, man. That's not a question I knew I was going to ask, but maybe you should comment on your strategy of accumulating stuff and what has worked for you, because I've always admired the fact that you don't you seem to be able to part with things easily and effectively too, and that helps you get the new stuff you want for your studio. And I'm sure that would help a lot of our listeners out just trying to figure out, how they're going to get that new microphone or whatever it is that they want.
It's taken me a while to arrive at that strategy and to be able to embrace it, because I think we grow attached to pieces of equipment that we gather over the years. There's some sentimental value. There's always the, I might need this one day, fear of missing out kind of mentality that we attach to gear. And I have to say, every time I've sold pieces of gear, I never regret it. I'm always like, oh, thank God that's gone. I've got the space. I don't have to deal with it anymore. I don't have to insure it anymore. It's gone. I've got that money converted into something that I'm actually currently using. And I think when we accumulate gear, it forces us to live in the past. And I hate doing that. I hate feeling like, well, I got to hold on to this because, you never know. Somebody might randomly call up and ask me, hey, do you have that microphone or do you have that ancient Pro Tools rig that nobody gives a shit about? No.
I think we just talked about an ancient Pro Tools rig on the last episode too. And I still have one. And of course the story was like, and then a client wanted to, open an old session. And so those of us who have the ancient rig feel proud of ourselves. But I think the fair question really, and the one that you're asking is like, was it really worth it for that, one $200 transfer gig that happened once in 10 years to like hang on to that shit forever?
Oh yeah. I'm so over it. I really am. I like having great stuff and I like to use that stuff, and everything else. It's like, am I using that? No. Now there are some things that I do hold on to for hobby reasons. Like I love doing field recording as a hobby. It's not like what I do day to day. So I've got a few things that I hold on to for that purpose. And then I've got, a cabinet full of mics that I take to sessions. So I've left things in my life that I think are useful. And I try to identify the things that are not, and I try to get rid of them because, and this is kind of going a little deeper, and I won't go too deep with this, but I mean, essentially, my parents are, my dad's 95, my mom's going to be 90 this year. And every time I go to their home, I'm always like, oh my gosh, there's going to come a day when we're going to have to clean all this stuff out, all the tchotchkes and things that people accumulate. I don't want to do that with my kids. I want to just like, when I die, I want them to like show up and go, okay, what has he got? Okay, this is all useful stuff. We can, either keep it or get rid of it and move on quickly. But, dad's not accumulated a garage full of crap.
Yeah. Well, so I actually woke up this morning thinking about that very topic in my basement that seems to have been frozen in time for pretty much the life of my kid. Imagine that the life of our kids growing up tends to create a framework for our own lives as parents and audio engineers. But it occurred to me that as I was looking around and I was thinking, how do I do this? Do I get a dumpster? Do I get one of those dumpster bags from Home Depot and they pick it up? And then finally I just looked on U-Haul, and I think it's as simple as like, rent a U-Haul van for 4 hours on a Saturday, clean 4 hours worth of stuff out of the basement, send the van back, and then just do it again on another Saturday. And after a couple of those, I'll have a cleaned out basement.
I don't know if you have this out there in Nashville, but or in Tennessee in general, in that part of the world, is we've got 1-800-GET-JUNK or 1-800-GOT-JUNK. Do you have that?
I think we have, we've got stuff like that. So do you pay them to pick up your junk, or do they actually come get it because they just love junk and they're
No. You pay them, like, by the,
by the truckload.
By the truckload, or I don't know how they measure.
Now,
it.
do they actually haul out the old spidery boxes, or do they do hand them the boxes and they just put them in the truck.
Oh, you just point them in the direction and just say, I need you to get rid of all that.
There you go.
And they do it. They charge you. And then as soon as they drive off, you're like, oh my gosh, look at all that space.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to doing that. And I guess on both of those descriptions, it's nice when some of us just need to hire somebody to just come do it. And then some of us are like, I don't want to spend that much money to throw some boxes away. And we're looking for the cheapest option. And like the renting a van thing literally might be like, $30 to rent it for 4 hours or something ridiculous, which is great.
Yeah.
So what about the other part of that? Like, because you had a studio that you probably, and I remember we talked about that on the first episode, but when you kind of downsized a much bigger commercial studio, did you have to go through some like learning processes about how to get rid of the stuff and how to let go of it and how to, whether it was letting go emotionally or whether it was just, it's hard to get rid of it and sell it, or whether it was like where do you even store it and organize it while you're selling it? Was that stuff you had to go through?
Oh yeah. You go through all of it. And you go through the learning process of selling gear. Like if you're selling gear on reverb.com, which, quite honestly, they're pretty good at what they do on it.
Right.
At the end of the day, I've bought stuff from Reverb that showed up trashed and they've dealt with it like immediately.
I did that too. A lesson I learned about buying stuff there is don't buy the most expensive one and don't buy the cheapest one. That really is those like go for the middle strategy seems to work.
Yeah. I think the area that I still to this day am trying to get a grip on is the shipping. If you got a piece of gear, you maybe you haven't shipped something in a long time and you forget what it costs to ship something via UPS. It's much more expensive than I think people realize. So I've been burned a few times where I've said, oh, it's going to be like, $45 to ship this. When in actuality, when you pay to have UPS pack it and get it shipped out, it ends up being about $100. And so like you eat $50 here, $50 there.
Or you price it right.
You got to learn how to price it right. And sometimes what I'll do is, because I just don't want to guess, I'll just up the price of the item and then I'll just say it's free shipping.
Have you ever, if you do enough, do you just go to the UPS store and you find out how much it really costs to box something of such and such a size?
No, but what I will do is on Reverb, you can buy your shipping through them and get a break. So if you've got something already boxed and ready to go, by the time you are ready to ship it, just buy your shipping from Reverb because you'll save a bunch. And then you can, have it basically print out everything, put the label on it to ship, and then drive over to the UPS store and just drop it off without even paying. And
that's great.
Whenever I do that, that's when I come out ahead.
Atom Audio celebrates 25 years of designing industry-leading monitors in Berlin by unveiling the Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a limited time. With the XART ribbon tweeter design, customizable speaker voicings, and SonarWorks integration for room correction, these monitors deliver professional-grade sound perfect for Grammy-winning producers and home studios. Make your studio cooler than cool with the Arctic White A4V and A7V, available for a limited time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. Now, have you ever had so much stuff to sell that you weren't even sure how you were going to keep it organized on a shelf for the time it would take you to sell all that stuff? And because I always think about that sometimes where I'm like, maybe I need to have a dedicated shelf that can just sit there for months while I'm placing stuff that I'm going to sell on it and know where to find it when it sells. Or is that making it too complicated?
No, I think you're making it pretty complex. I just put all that crap in my closet. And then my wife will come in and go, are you using this? Are you going to sell? Like, what's going on with this? Why is all this in here?
And then you just hold up your phone and you flash the sales page.
No. Then I'm like, oh, yeah, I got to list that. Some stuff you got to take the pictures, you got to go through the description and all that.
Pictures are crucial. Always take the time to take really nice pictures, right?
Oh, yeah. Take outstanding pictures. I try to see, that's where my photography hobby comes in hand, where I take the best pictures I possibly can and get it up there. Because to me, it's like if you're buying something, you want to give the person, shopping the most information possible. And that visual information, I think, is critical.
Okay, so we can move away from this, but before we do, sell the Rockstars on this idea of you've got this old stuff, you want that new thing. Here's how you go from being crowded with a bunch of junk to, lights are shining and sparkles are happening in your nice, clean, empty studio, and you've got this shiny new piece of gear.
So you want me to tell them how to get to that?
Yeah, I just want you to get them psyched up for it. Psyched up to part with the old.
I think you're a good example of that. Like, yes, I remember when I first met you, like, I wanted to redo your studio when I first saw it. I was just like, you got to get rid of all this shit and put it in some new shit. And I was giving you so much grief. I wanted to like do one of those HGTV shows. I just wanted to send you on vacation and do a studio makeover.
Yeah.
And, but you ended up doing it, eventually on your own, which was great. Your studio looks fabulous.
Thanks, man.
And you got rid of all that stuff that you don't use.
It helped, to work with this, with Carl, a studio designer, because he had a vision for what we were going to try and do. And he was not afraid to point out, get rid of that, and that to make space for things. And it was tough. There was that combination of like deciding, okay, well, if I get rid of it, there's part of me that's like, I don't want to let it go for so little that I'm like, next year I have to buy it all over again. And I feel like I just wasted money. There's that part. Then there's the other part that says this item means something to me personally, and then there's the other part that just says, am I letting go of something that's part of, making a great sounding record? And I think that letting go of stuff for some money, that wasn't that hard. You just decide, okay, I'm not going to be stupid and let it go for nothing, but I'm not going to overprice it. And, you get a sense. If you look a little bit, you get a feeling for, well, how much is this mic really worth? Or how much is this tape machine really worth? In my case. And then the emotional side, letting go of my mixing console was a tough one. But finally I was like, wait a minute. What's wrong with, I had this thing for a period of time. I don't have to have it for the rest of my life. I could just say like I had it for 15 years and I made some great records with it. And now I'm ready to do something new, And then the last part about whether things sound great, I think that's easy too, because if you let go of something that sounds great for making records and you replace it with something else that sounds great, then all you're doing is just changing up your color palette a little bit. You don't have to get stuck on the way things used to be.
I guess if you look at it holistically and you think about the records that you've done, like if I go back and listen to stuff I've done, I never remember the gear scenario.
Right.
What stands the test of time is the music, not like the memory of the gear. I rapidly forget what we used. It's
right.
Like,
we always listen and we're like, God, that sounds great. How the hell did I do that?
Right. Because in the moment you made decisions about, how you wanted that record to sound. So I think the more important piece of gear there is your brain, your ears, and your ability to be creative and navigate a session with a group of people. I think that's more important than all of this stuff. So, you use what you have and you get to know it really well. Clearly, I'm sitting in front of my Grace monitor controller here, which is like the brain of everything I do here when I'm mixing Atmos or stereo. There's no way I would sell this. Right. If I sell this, that's a sign that I'm getting out, unless there's another piece of gear that comes to replace it. But for now, this is something that is sacred to me. it was, it was pricey and it was worth it. And now I can mix great stuff on it.
And you are, man. And we're going to talk about that for sure. Last question about the parting with old stuff. Did you find it was easier to have your sights set on a particular thing you wanted to let you get rid of the things that you didn't need anymore? Or do you just encourage us all to just get rid of stuff even if we don't know what we want next?
I think it's good, at least it is for me, to evaluate what is your current workflow, what's your system of working, what pieces of gear help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. And if, like, when I liquidated or got rid of my old studio and started to liquidate gear, I started to look at the pile of gear and go, okay, this is overkill. I don't need 32 channels of Lynx converters in a mix room. Okay, so what would be the smart move there? And so you start to envision, like, okay, I foresee this kind of workflow and this is the gear that would accomplish that. Therefore, that's going to cost this much. So let me sell this, turn that cash into this new piece of gear and this new workflow so that I can get to work. And I think it's more important to envision the workflow itself and then find the gear that fits that workflow rather than trying to fit a workflow to gear that you see and get turned on by.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, when I think about my basement on the one hand and my studio on the other, or even my podcast studio, which I transitioned to, a whole new design and a whole new clean look, it really does inspire me to have a little bit of a vision for what I want to do. And then it's easier to like go for it. It's just like doing an overdub in the studio. When you hear the part in your head, then you're like, great, I know I'm going to go play on the piano or the guitar or something right now, rather than just going out and noodling mindlessly on a microphone and then going, oh, we're going to have to sort through all that. Interesting analogies. All right, Matt. So let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now. So thanks, Rockstars, for doing that. Now that we've gotten rid of all the old stuff and we've gotten into the new stuff, we can talk about Matt's new stuff, which is a hell of a cool, streamlined, efficient, no room for bullshit mix room for stereo and Atmos mixes. And then I didn't really say this in the intro, but Matt, the work you've been doing on Atmos is really remarkable. And you've done a lot of really cool things since you did this leap into this new immersive audio mixing. A couple of things you did, which I did mention in the beginning, is you mixed 2 songs for my record, Skadoosh, which are awesome. So Rockstars, go check those out. And the link is a Apple Music playlist, because that's the one that's going to let you hear Atmos playback if you're on an Atmos system, or if you're in headphones, you can do the immersive binaural rendering straight into headphones. But then you've also worked with artists like Alanis, Morissette. You've been mixing Green Day. You've worked with a bunch of independent artists. So with that preface, tell us a little bit about your studio right now, and maybe kind of give us a walkthrough verbally and describe all the tools that you're surrounded by.
Well, it's a pretty small room. It's a bedroom in our house. And when it started out, when we first moved into this house, it became the default playroom for the kids. It was just kind of a place where we could put all the toys. And
now it's your playroom.
Now it's my playroom. And my youngest 16-year-old likes to occasionally come in and say, I want my playroom back. So it's a strange room because it must have been an add-on. I'm not really sure how it worked, but none of the walls are parallel for some reason. And it's a mid-century modern house, so the ceiling is sloping. So acoustically, it's pretty cool on its own. But I knew that I was going to, be doing stuff in here. So over time, I kind of, I worked in here for a bit after I got out of the studio in San Francisco that I had, and had a particular workflow. I had some ginormous beautiful but ginormous furniture in here for racks and like a mastering mixing desk kind of situation.
Right. That would be the example of still holding on to the old stuff, trying to make it fit into your new workflow.
Well, no, actually that was kind of a, if we think about it in three phases, phase one was like, had the studio, brought home all the gear, started to get rid of stuff. Phase two was like, the newer gear, the newer setup to put in here. And then I grew out of that. And phase three is where I'm at now with all the Atmos stuff. So the phase two gear, I had this beautiful Zayor desk and racks, and it looked great, but it was really eating up a lot of the space. So I knew that when I switched to the Atmos setup, I had to sell all that stuff. So I got rid of it and sold it to a friend who really put it to great use. And what I try to do is take a small room and maximize the amount of space. So instead of having, like a lot of people gravitate towards these desks, big wood, beautiful desks that you can shove a bunch of rack gear in. Well, I reduced my rack gear. I put it in a small rack off to the side over here, stuff that I really don't need to get to on a daily basis. And then I put the most used stuff on a sound anchor DAW cart. I had seen these sound anchor carts in studios before. It's like, it's usually the monitors mounted to it and it's a metal roll around kind of cart.
Yeah.
And I thought, what if I just had one of those with a couple shelves on it? And I saw some pictures, and I talked to Vance Powell because Vance had one of these carts, and he had like a particular kind of setup that was kind of hinting at where I wanted to go, but not exactly. So
yeah, I think he has sort of a cart with the monitor off to the side a little bit, right?
Right. It's the same thing. It's a sound anchor cart. So I took a couple ideas from his, and then I, built up my own kind of theory of how it should work. And now when you walk into my room, instead of a giant desk, I have this cart with a keyboard and a mouse on one level. The next level shelf is smaller, and it's got the Grace controller and a couple IK Multimedia iLoud speakers for close-up stereo stuff, and then a monitor on a little shelf here attached to the back of it. And then I'm surrounded by a bunch of speakers. So I have all this space around me. Racks are off to the side in a little alcove, so they're not taking up all the space in the room. So I can get a couple people in here for a small room comfortably, and we can all listen. And it's a very streamlined setup. It's exactly what I need. There's not really much more to it than that. I do have a couple pieces of gear now that I'm starting to identify as dead weight, things I'm not really using much. I used to really rely on my Universal Audio Apollo. I rarely use it now because I use the Grace to run everything in and out of.
Mm-hmm.
And so once again, back to the getting rid of gear thing, while I do get rid of the gear over time, I keep my eyes on stuff like, hey, I'm watching you, gear. Oh, you're not getting used. You're on probation. You might be on your way out. So I've already got my eyes on stuff here in the rack. And I'm like, okay, I could probably get rid of that. I could probably get rid of that because it's just not getting used as much. So,
yeah.
So I'm surrounded by speakers. As I said, I've got a left, center, right in front of me. I've got two speakers on my left and right, to my sides. And then I've got two behind me. And then I've got four on the ceiling and a subwoofer. It's a 714 Atmos setup. And essentially it's, I've got an M2 laptop over here to my right that talks over Dante to my Grace controller, and then my Grace controller talks to my speakers. And it's as simple as that. It's not a complex setup. It's very streamlined.
Okay, so some cool takeaways from that. So 714, again, the 7 are the speakers that are around us on the plane of our ears.
Yeah.
And then the 1 refers to the sub.
Refers to the sub, which is, categorized as the LFE, the low frequency effect kind of thing, borrowing from the film world. It's where we send a little bit of low end just for support in music. And in film, they just send like effects to their, like, the bottom end of an engine rumbling or a truck rolling by. But I try not to send, like a dedicated, like I don't send the kick drum or the bass guitar there and not anywhere else. It's
right,
just
because then it won't survive as a mix otherwise.
Right. Because if you get in front of an Atmos, I've been on Atmos home systems that don't have subwoofers. And if you're dependent on all the low frequency coming out of the subwoofer, then you're kind of screwed. So it's purely a support.
And if you chose to have 2 subs or 4 subs, would it be a 7.4.4? Or is it always called 1?
No, if I had 2 subs, I guess it would be a 7.2.4 setup.
Okay. All right. I didn't know if that was sort of official terminology. And then the 4 refers to the speakers on the ceiling.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like overhead front, left and right, overhead rear, left and right.
Exactly.
Something like that. Okay, cool. Good. I think it's good for us to keep breaking this down for people to visualize it. And then the M2 laptop. So that's cool. So you have felt, you found it successful to operate the studio off a laptop in a way that you can easily just plug it in and get to work. But do you think of your laptop as something that you still carry with you if you went to a coffee shop or to go do a remote recording or to go work in the kitchen, and then you just can come into your studio and plug it back in and boom, there you go? Or do you have any tips for rock stars who are thinking about, should I use a laptop for my studio, for example?
I think if you think you're going to be doing any work remotely, you should consider a laptop. If you don't think you're going to do that, then I would get like a Mac Studio. I think you could get more bang for your buck out of that than you could a laptop. I like having the laptop because if we go somewhere, at minimum, I have to be able to do my podcast. And in addition to that, usually before I go on a vacation, I will have completed all the audio work for clients that I need to do. But there has been occasions where I've been on vacation and somebody's hit me up and said, could we just do this one little fix, one little change? And it's, it's no sweat. You just pop open the session, make the change and print it and go.
Hey, rock stars. Yeah, you. I've got a secret to tell you. Want to know how I get a consistent sound mixing over 1,000 hours of Recording Studio Rockstars? My secret is using iZotope, RX, Ozone, Neutron, Voice Enhancement Assistant, and Nectar to make sure every episode of this podcast sounds great. Right now, you are hearing RX Breath Control, D-Click, D-Clip, DS, Deplosive, Voice Denoise, Ozone Multiband Compression, Neutron EQ, VEA, and Limiting, all from iZotope. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off or pick up the new Trash Light along with many of the other free cool plugins over at iZotope.com. We've had mastering guests on the show talking about that, needing that ability too. And so then things you would likely have to consider if you wanted to take your studio portable with you is laptop, maybe a 2-channel interface so that you can plug in headphones, and an iLock to just bring your plug-in authorizations. Or are we living in a world now where all the plugins you would want to use are all just sort of like authorized on the cloud and you don't even have to think about that anymore?
No, I still have to bring my iLock with me wherever I go. And I'm looking around the room. I'm trying to find out where'd my headphone box go. I've got a Grace 2-channel headphone amp that I take with me. You driven by USB. Plug that in and a pair of headphones, and I've got a great setup.
Grace is, they're making awesome stuff. I have the M201 Mark II dual channel mic pre in my studio. And I love it. It's great because it's so, I've never had like a super, super high gain, super, super clean mic preamp like that before. And I just used it the other day on a session and I used the RBN button, which is their ribbon,
The
custom
ribbon, right.
designed ribbon button, which basically keeps you totally safe from sending phantom power to your ribbon mic, which is great. Thank you, Michael and Eben and Grace Designs for putting that in, because I don't want to have to replace my Coles 4038. But also I think it adds additional gain and stuff. And then so they're making a bunch of really cool stuff. So your headphone box is the let me see here.
It's the M900.
M900. Okay, great.
That's my portable headphone box, and then my main controller is an M908.
Right. I'm looking at the picture now. That is, we can start diving into that now. So when you get in this world of mixing Atmos and immersive, you realize that you're now faced with a new challenge. So we're familiar with the volume knob on our console or on our headphone jack or whatever, but what we never really thought of before is that volume knob is essentially controlling the levels of two channels at once, the left and the right channel, because that's usually what we're dealing with. But when we go into this world of immersive audio, all of a sudden we need a controller that is carefully and precisely controlling the levels of 7.1.4 different channels.
12 channels,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, 12 channels of audio all need to go up and down, perfectly matched and perfectly great sounding. So tell us about this M908 controller, and maybe just talk about what why a controller like that is important in the first place. Just the concept of that for an Atmos setup like yours.
Well, I mean, it's not that challenging of a concept. I mean, if you've got, at minimum, let's say you've got an Apollo Twin, your volume knob controls the two speakers, as you said. All you're doing is controlling more speakers, and you've got to route audio to all those different speakers. The 908 and some of the other things out there just allow you to, like the 908 allows me to solo and mute channels, different speakers. So like if I'm trying to trace a problem or just highlight something to a client, I could say, I'll solo the side speakers and say, yeah, I put the guitars here, check that out. So it's all the basic functionality, mute, dim, volume, drives a pair of headphones. In my particular case with Atmos, it allows me to not only play back the 12 channels, but my particular workflow right now with clients is I'm mixing Atmos and stereo simultaneously out of the same Pro Tools session. So the Grace allows me to not only monitor the 714, but then I can then switch. I've got a 2.0 down mix switch here on the Grace that I programmed so that I can listen to what does the stereo sound like. And then for headphones, I can listen to what the binaural sounds like. That's at the flick of a switch. And in some cases, you may want to hear different other surround configurations like 5.1 or 5.1.4. So I've got those programmed. I mentioned the Apollo. I still have the Apollo, so that's hooked up. The analog and the digital outs of that in stereo are hooked up to this for if I need to utilize that. It's been a while for that, but that's still there. But then I also have all these other things hooked up, like the USB out of the M2. I've got, what else do I have? I have a cassette deck. I got a CD player over there. I got all kinds of other technologies that are going in and out of this whole thing. I don't have a patch bay. Everything's running into the Grace, and I can route and move and monitor and control everything from this single point. So it's a different mindset, a different workflow. And to me, it's working in the age that we are now, 2024, Pro Tools centric. I don't really need to have a patch bay and any analog, tape machines or anything like that, or a mixing console. I've got everything I need with a computer and this simple controller and a great monitoring environment.
So let me see if I can help visualize this a little bit. A traditional volume knob controller in our studio, which used to just be in our mixing consoles. And then we started having digital workstations, and then the volume knob was, well, it was in a variety of places, but it was either on the workstation like Universal Audio. You just reach over and there's the volume knob on the interface, or we would have a studio and along came this idea of just a master controller, a master volume controller. And, PreSonus had one. Some of us would start with something like that.
I've got right. I used to have a PreSonus Central Station years ago.
Yeah, but those all primarily, a lot of them, you think about, okay, I'm going to have to send the output analog over to this thing, and then it goes through the volume knob and it comes out analog and goes to my speakers. But but some of them, everything stays digital all the way there. And this Grace one, the M908 that you're using, is that sort of Dante. So it's digital right into the controller, the box, and then your box becomes the converter to convert it to analog going to the speakers?
That's correct. So the Grace becomes the D to A converter in this case.
Yeah.
And I guess the whole, monitor controller concept really came as a result of the digital age, where we were just monitoring two channels out of a Pro Tools interface. I mean, how many studios did you used to go into, or even to this day, where they have two faders up on the console? Yeah. You got like a 64 channel console and two channels are up to monitor Pro Tools. It's just like, well, okay, do we really need all that? Well, maybe in a commercial studio, sure, you need flexibility. You need to have stuff like that. But here at home, no, I just need to monitor the basic things coming out of Pro Tools, and that's it.
Well, I think for those of us, and we don't have to go too deep into a, do you want a console discussion, but for those of us that are still producing and recording in a studio setting, there exist arguments that say you might really like to have a mixer, because sometimes it's easier to just pull up a couple of faders and create a sound and record that into whatever you're recording. And there was a time where there was a big discussion about, should you have a console for mixing out of your, if you're just mixing, because does the summing sound of a console sound good to you? And that can still be true in some situations, but as you're pointing out, more often than not, the convenience of letting the computer do the mixing and, quote, mixing in the box was worth, bypassing all those fader options and just wanting to just wish you had that controller, the master volume knob section, which this does. So now with your setup, your things you would use it for, the way you would set it up is you'd have, I see there's like CR1, CR2, and CR3, which I assume are control room output or something like that. So CR1 might be your Atmos mix, and then would CR2 be the stereo mix, and CR3 is the binaural headphone setup or something like that?
No, in this case, like for me, I've got it programmed. So CR1 is the 714 setup. That's attached to the PMC speakers I've got. Then CR2 for me is just the iLoud speakers in stereo. CR3 could be another set of speakers. So you can come up with these different speaker configurations with the CR1, 2, and 3.
Okay, cool. And then the digital touchpad gives you a selection of inputs, so you could have all your Atmos renderer, or I'm going to butcher the terminology. You can set us straight here, Matt. But your Atmos inputs coming for a complete Atmos listen back, or you could switch to another input and it could just be the UAD coming in, or another one is just, a couple of analog inputs. And does the way to think about this controller is it's a controller that sits on our desk, but then the cable runs over to an actual rack-mounted box that has all the actual audio coming in and out of it?
Yeah, there's a deceptively simple-looking box over to my right, 2-rack space box. It's got a headphone out on it, but I also have a headphone out on the remote, and a very simple, kind of not a D-sub, but kind of similar to a D-sub style connector connected over a copper cable that goes several feet over to the main brain. And in
Okay,
that brain,
that's cool. I didn't know you could. So you've got a headphone jack right on the volume controller right there at the desk, so it's right next to you.
I do, yeah, yeah. So the brain is just over there in the rack, looking, innocent, but really behind the scenes, like
guilty.
there's this.
It looks innocent, but it's really guilty.
Yeah, it's definitely doing a lot. Inside that box is essentially, I think, a Linux operating system running a whole thing. It's quite fascinating, actually.
That's awesome. All right, so I think that really helps us visualize all this stuff. Talk about your speakers. So what speakers did you choose for your Atmos setup? I don't think we got into this on the last podcast episode. Apologies if we are repeating any of this, Rockstars, but give us a quick breakdown again on the speakers that are in front of you and above you and around you and all that. How do you set those up?
Overall, I made the decision to go with PMC speakers because I had known Maurice over at PMC down in Los Angeles through years of going to the PMC booth at NAMM, and we had a lot of mutual friends. So when I decided to do this, I called Maurice and I said, my room is, it's the following dimensions. I sent him diagrams, videos, all kinds of detailed information so he could look at it and go, oh, yeah, you could totally do it. And here's how you could do it. So for my left, center, right, I got the entry-level PMC speaker, which is called the Result 6. It's a powered speaker. For the surrounds, the ceiling speakers and the speakers to the side and behind me, I went with PMC CI30s. Those are passive speakers, so they needed a power amp. And I got an Amphion 8-channel power amp to run them. And the reason I went with passive speakers is because those speakers are only 4 inches in depth. And with a small room, if I tried to use Result 6s everywhere, the Result 6s are so deep physically that it would have eaten up all the space.
Right.
Would have been in the way of the door. It really wouldn't have worked out. So these CI30s, and there's CI45s and I think CI60s, they go up in driver count in the speaker body. But these CI30s are, as Maurice and my friends over at PMC and Ted over there said, this is as close to the Result 6 as you're going to get. So this is a good pair, a good matchup, because we wanted to have, similar speakers throughout the whole thing. So there's not a great disparity when you go from the left side to the left speaker or the right side to the right speaker or whatever. So there's a parity there.
Right. Let me back that up. To visualize why that matters. So when you say from the left speaker to the left side, then a question might be, well, why do you need to do that? So a reminder to us that when we think about mixing in Atmos, we need to think about what you said, which is you're mixing in this immersive setup, but you're also folding it down to a stereo mix at the same time. And so that same guitar that might live over on the left side in an immersive mix might fold down to just be now in the left speaker in a stereo mix. Is that correct? And if that's the case, it would really throw you off about your decision making if you hear it coming out of one speaker one way and they go to the other speaker and it's very different.
Quite honestly, I think sure, that plays a factor, but I think it has more to do with if I'm panning something, let's say I have an object in an Atmos mix that's moving, and it's moving from my left speaker to my left side speaker. I don't want it to sound drastically different going between those two speakers. I need a continuity of sound there so that, like, if you pan pink noise from speaker to speaker in this room, it sounds the same.
That's amazing.
Like, it's just, it sounds the same. I'm sure somebody with, maybe better ears than I have could probably point out like minor differences. But I mean, like, unless you're going to get into the minutia of that, which I think is pointless, I think it's better. Like, holistically, this whole system works well together. It sounds the same. If I pan the kick drum to the left side, wherever I'm putting it, it sounds the same.
I love that, panning the kick drum to the left side.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to do that.
Bring about the Beatles.
You know what I'm saying. So if I'm panning a guitar or a vocal, I can move it around the room and it sounds the same, except for where it's emanating from.
Well, and that makes sense because the intention of moving a sound in space is supposed to, ideally, it's just supposed to sound like the sound moved in space, and that's it, right? And if your speakers are different, it's going to sound like it moved in space, but did something else, changed in some other tonal way that is it's going to influence your perception of what's going on with your mix.
And I'm leaving a speaker out here, the subwoofer. I love PMC. They make great stuff, but their subwoofers were just out of my price range.
Okay.
And I just decided, I was like, okay, I can't pony up, a huge amount of money for a subwoofer. There's something inherently in my DNA that says the line for subwoofer spending stops here. So I got a Cali Audio sub, and to me, that was a great decision. It was a cost-effective decision. It fit well with the system. And
that doesn't sound like an object moving problem or challenge anyway, because you're not going to move something to the LFE, right?
Right. It's not like I went with PMCs in the front and Cali Audio speakers in the back. I went with all PMCs for the primary decision-making, and then a Cali Audio sub to support all of that. So to me, that was an okay compromise to make.
Okay, cool. Talk a little bit more about the convergence of stereo and Atmos in your work process.
Well, okay, so what's going to be absent in the playlist you're providing is Green Day. And the reason for that is because the stuff I did for Green Day was the Atmos mix of the theme song to the Bill Maher show on HBO. So if you want to hear that, you're going to hear it on HBO on an Atmos setup. And if you don't hear it on an Atmos setup, you're going to hear the down mix of it. During the process of making that mix, we needed to listen to not only the Atmos 714 mix, but we also had to have a setup to monitor a 514 Atmos mix, as well as a stereo down mix. So I was told all this, so I reconfigured the Grace to make sure that would happen. And I learned a few things in that process of not only about the Grace, but just, it's like, oh, okay, well, the down mix, stereo, okay. So we're listening to the Atmos mix in 714, then we're listening to it in 514, and then we're like, oh, let's listen to the stereo. In that process of doing that mix, it occurred to me, I was like, wait a minute. Like the typical process of doing Atmos at that point for many people, maybe not for all, but for many, had been the stereo mix gets done and then stems are made from the stereo mix to bring into Atmos and mix it there. And I thought, what if I could just bypass all that and I could just do one mix and monitor the 714 and the stereo and flip between the two and make decisions to derive what ultimately needed to be two different mixes anyway. I thought that I've got the hardware to do that. All I got to do is just, work with a client to make that happen. So that's how that started. So it just means that it's almost like, if you're mixing in stereo and then you stop for a minute and you reference a mono, like, maybe it's an Auratone or some small speaker somewhere in mono, or you might just listen in mono just to see what happens. It's the same thing here. I'm just testing between 714 and stereo. And certain things will show themselves in each format. So for me, it actually makes for better mixing because I can listen to it in 714 and think, oh, that sounds fantastic. How's it sound in stereo? Oh, vocal's a little loud. Let's move the vocal down just a bit. Move the vocal down, listen back in Atmos and go, oh, okay, yeah, that actually improves the Atmos a bit more as well. It's just it's a checks and balances thing between the two. And then when I'm done and I print everything, I've got two mixes that tonally are identical. One's just a little wider than the other. One's just a little bigger than the other.
What do songwriters, music producers, DJs, EDM artists, TV and film composers all have in common with you and me? We all need amazing sounds that instantly elevate our music to the desired style. That's why Native Instruments is your ultimate toolkit, offering a massive library of sounds for your studio. Whether you're into hip-hop, indie pop, classic rock, meditation music, dance beats, or orchestral arrangements, the Native Instruments Complete Bundle has it all. From drums, loops, and beats to synths, realistic strings, vintage bass, guitars, and keys, it's a comprehensive collection. I love recording real bands in my studio, but then enhancing the tracks with drum samples, synths, and futuristic keys from Battery, Contact, Massive X, Guitar Rig, and Hybrid keys, for example. It's a surefire way to make your productions sound modern and unique. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off or get Complete Start for free today, featuring 2,000 sounds and 6 gigs of samples at nativeinstruments.com. Atom Audio is celebrating 25 years of researching, developing, and manufacturing industry-leading monitoring solutions in Berlin. To mark this milestone, our friends at Atom Audio are unveiling a special limited edition series of monitors that will look stunning in your studio and sound as awesome as your music. Introducing the Arctic White A4V and A7V series. Available for a limited time to pro and home studio owners like yourself, the clean, glossy white finish exudes a luxurious feel and will stand out in any studio or home audio system. Featuring the XART accelerated ribbon tweeter design and customizable speaker voicings, the Arctic White A4V and A7V retain the full specifications of the original design. Plus, with SonarWorks integration for automated room correction, you can fine-tune your monitors to your control room's acoustics. Atom Audio's commitment to delivering professional-grade, high-fidelity sound to studios worldwide has made these monitors a perfect fit for Grammy-winning producers in both pro and home studios for a quarter of a century. Now you can bring that beautiful high-fidelity sound to your own productions and make your studio look as cool as your music sounds. Don't miss out on the limited edition Arctic White A4V and A7V monitors, available for a short time with the standard extended 5-year warranty at atomaudio.com. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Matt Boudreau from Working Class Audio, joining us here on Recording Studio Rockstars. Matt, my brother from another podcast. Are you ready to jam?
Let's jam, Lidge.
Let's do it, man. All right, so we were just talking about this stereo down mixing stuff, and it reminds me of the stereo mixing process of getting familiar at different listening levels and different speakers with the idea of you never know how people are going to listen to it out in the real world, so you want it to strike the best balance between different situations. And this really is another version of that, right? Because somebody might be listening to it in stereo when they hear it, or they might be listening to it in Atmos. And those things are partly in our control, but they're also outside of our control because the streaming platforms just automatically switch from one to the other, depending on what your situation is, right?
Mm-hmm. Depending on what gear is available.
So in my world, I've found a couple of ways to listen in Atmos. One is my Apple AirPod Pros. I think they're version 2 or something, but they're not brand new. I mean, they're definitely a year old at this point, or more at this point, at the point this episode comes out. And then I think I have also successfully just plugged in a pair of headphones in the studio and just told Apple Music to turn on Atmos or immersive spatial audio. So let's talk a little bit about that for a sec. Those are ways that I can hear the Atmos version of the mix. If I'm in my Apple AirPod Pros, I've learned that there's a way to, and I was able to do this before this episode, just listening to your mixes. But what I can do is I can, if I'm on my iPhone and I've got the AirPod Pros in, I can go into the Apple Music app settings. And within that, there are a couple of settings that allow me to switch back and forth between the stereo mix and the Atmos mix.
That's correct.
And
if you subscribe to Apple Music, that's correct.
Right.
I've found it to be the case where if you don't subscribe to Apple Music and you have an iPhone and you go to the settings we're talking about, the Dolby Atmos settings are not visible.
Okay, good. That's good to know. So I am subscribing, so I wouldn't have known that otherwise. Sometimes that's the challenge talking about this stuff. If you have the feature, you don't know that you wouldn't have the feature if things were slightly different.
Right.
So Rockstars, if you're trying to listen to this and you don't subscribe to Apple Music, then I guess you really can't hear the Atmos mixes any other way, or are there some other platforms that will let you do that right now?
You can, Tidal and Amazon offer Atmos playback as well, although I don't subscribe to Tidal. I do subscribe to Amazon Music. So I guess it depends on the kind of phone you have. If you're on headphones and you're trying to hear it that way, there's obviously many other ways to listen that are becoming more prevalent. Case in point, I was at Costco the other day. And whenever I go to Costco with my wife, she heads off to the main part of Costco, and I kind of hover in the electronics area and wander around taking pictures of all the new devices that say Dolby Atmos and take note of what's available. And I was there the other day and I noticed JBL is selling an Atmos-capable boombox that was pretty cool. It was like, it was like $400. And it was, a way for somebody to hear an Atmos mix outside of headphones. Obviously, they had their Sonos. Sonos had their products there that you can listen to. And all the new TVs are, coming equipped with Atmos out of the box.
All right, so I think you might need to describe this, at least give us a brief description of, you just described 12 speakers in your studio.
Yes.
And
okay,
people hear
that...
this, they hear about a Jambox on the TV and they're like, wait, what? So
right,
what does that
right.
mean when you say that stuff?
Okay, well, so let's take I think a simple version of that. Okay, so Sonos makes a product called the Era 300. It's I'm going to just call it a single device instead of a single speaker, because inside of that Era 300 are multiple speakers firing off in different directions. That's an example of a product that you can buy for under $500 that you can hear an Atmos mix on streamed from Apple Music, for example. If you bought two Era 300s and connect them, it expands the soundscape of what you're hearing.
Essentially, it physically puts more speakers in a wider array just by having physically more speakers, but then it has the internal digital brains to know that and reconfigure so that the speakers are now spitting out different stuff relative to each other.
I think that this is the confusing part, and it's taken me a while to, and excuse the pun, wrap my head around this concept, but like, even if you were to play, let's say you subscribe to Apple Music and you have an iPhone. Okay, I have an iPhone 15 Pro Max in front of me. So if I hold my iPhone, if I tilt it to, what is this, landscape mode. If I turn it into landscape mode and I play an Atmos mix, the Atmos mix I did, one of the two I did for you, I can get a version of that based on what speaker configuration is available inside of the iPhone. I can also go over to my M2 laptop and get a more detailed resolution version of that, because there's like 6 speakers in the laptop.
Oh, no shit. They got multiple speakers, more than just 2 in the laptop.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Although I don't I have to admit it, because I'm using my laptop to work all the time and it's over to my right. I rarely will listen to mixes on there, although I probably should more. So I guess the point of what I'm trying to say is that it's you mix on a system like I've got here, but then when it's played back in the consumer world, it adapts to what's available. So if there's a 3.1 system available, it will spread itself out on that. If it's a Sonos Era 300 with multiple speakers inside a box, it will adapt to that. More speakers starts to equate to more resolution. And if you get up into the range of having a Sonos soundbar and a subwoofer and two rear speakers, then you really start to get completely immersed in it. And then, of course, there's the cars. Now, as we record this, the time we're recording this, there's a few cars available in the higher range, for people who have a shit ton of money, which I don't, to go buy a top level Mercedes to have Atmos in my car. I have seen prototypes of more working class cars like Hondas, where that's starting to come into play. I guess the thing with cars, though, is, as we all know, it's like an idea can get brought, or a concept can be brought to the drafting table, I guess, but it won't be implemented into a car for like 5 years because of the time it takes to produce a car and design a car and all that.
So let's pause for just a moment. Let's brag on ourselves just a little bit. When you and I were at NAMM, did we or did we not get to listen to what Atmos sounds like in a very nice Mercedes that belonged to Bob Clearmountain? Did you hear? Remember at the Apogee party? I assume
Right.
that was Bob's car.
Oh, I didn't go into that car. Did you?
You didn't go back? Oh, sorry. I thought you got a chance to hear it too. Rockstars, we went to, when Matt and I were out at NAMM, we went to a really cool party where Bob was doing some mixing of a band right there live in the studio. And they had a really nice Mercedes outside, like you just described, super high end. And we were able to go and sit inside it and listen to some mixes. And it was really cool. It was a really cool experience. They had subs in this driver and passenger seat that would kind of thump into your back a little bit at the same time.
I completely missed that. But I went to this little bungalow at that party that Apogee owns, these small bungalow houses in the area. I walked down this path with a group of people and we went in there into this bungalow to listen to a full-on Sonos system.
Oh, cool.
And I got to listen to mixes on that Sonos system.
And then there was there were some other systems set up in the different rooms too. So that was pretty cool. So I guess they were just showing different ways to hear it on different configurations and different systems.
I have heard the Mercedes at Dolby before, and it sounds amazing.
Yeah. So suffice it to say, Rockstars, I just wanted to paint this picture of having fun listening on a really, really fancy car stereo. But back to reality for a minute, because ultimately, it's what everybody gets a chance to hear that's going to have the most impact on the music industry and on decisions that we all want to make about making records and about making them sound great. And I just want to point out what Matt is saying here and reinforce that, which is what's striking about this new immersive audio experience and potential future, and that makes it different from what those of us who've been doing this for a while have heard before. It's like, oh, it's quad again or something like that. When people make that argument, is it's not, because in this case, because of the digital brain aspect to it all, it has, as Matt described, it's got this ability to reconfigure itself for all these different listening experiences, which means now if you make a record and somebody does have a really nice set of speakers, it's going to unfold itself into that, just as easily as it's going to play back on a pair of headphones.
Correct.
And that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And I mean, I think by the time this episode airs, we're going to see even more stuff out there. Every time I go to Costco, I'm always like, I went over Christmas for 2023, and they had a few offerings, but then, here we are now in February, and as we record this, there was a crap ton more. So
Yeah.
I love seeing the progression on the consumer electronics side of it, because that just gives the consumer more listening options to enjoy it, because it's really fun to listen to.
So I want to complete this explainer for how to check it out if you do have the Apple AirPod Pros, or if you even just plug in a pair of headphones into an interface in your studio or on your laptop, I guess, and you've got the I guess even if you're just listening on speakers on your iPhone or on the laptop, you want to go, and Matt, you can either agree with me on this, or you can set me straight if you think I got it wrong, but you go into the settings for Apple Music, and first thing you want to do is make sure you turn on sound check. And sound check is the level matching feature, which is going to say, let's make sure that the different things we're listening to are both level matched, as opposed to one's just simply louder than the other. And so that way you can then set Atmos to off or always on. And those two options can let you be confident that you've switched it off so that you're hearing the stereo mix, or you've switched it on so now you're hearing the Atmos mix. And when you do that, when I did that the first time, and I heard it in these AirPod Pros, that's when I had the aha moment. I was like, oh, wow, that is really cool. Because all of a sudden, when I switch over to your Atmos mixes, Matt, from the stereo mixes, you hear, and it's cool to hear you talk about your mixing strategy where you're mixing both at the same time, because on those mixes, I do hear that the stereo to Atmos, there's like a coherence between the quality, I don't want to say the quality. Well, yeah, the quality of the mix, like the intent of the mix stays together, right?
Although on your mixes, I mix stems.
Right. So I was just about to point that out. So on my record, Matt did not do the stereo mix. That was something that I had done a while ago, and then Matt had to work from that. So that's a different topic. But with your mixes that you did for a bunch of the artists, I think in your discography, you did the stereo and the Atmos at the same time using your configuration.
No, well, I think by the time by the time this interview comes out, yeah, the majority will be, I've done the stereo and the Atmos. As it currently stands now, it's kind of like probably 60-40 right now. But by the time this comes out, it's probably going to be like 70-30 or 80-20 in favor of me doing stereo and Atmos. I do want to make a correction to something you said. So if you are in the Apple Music settings on an iPhone, you do pay for Apple Music. I've got my Dolby Atmos. There's three choices: automatic, always on, and off. I have mine set to automatic.
Right.
So,
but that's just because you want it to automatically switch for you as a listener. I was trying to describe the experience of intentionally trying to compare the stereo mix to the Atmos mix, and here when you're exploring and you're thinking, well, what's the difference?
Oh yeah.
By switching it off or switching it always on, then you know that you're hearing the Atmos, or you know that you're hearing the stereo.
Yeah. And if the little Dolby Atmos logo appears on the screen, you know you're listening. You should be listening in Atmos. Right. That's the intention.
And then if it says lossless or something like that, then that implies that you're probably hearing the stereo.
You're probably hearing the stereo. And we're kind of, I'm a new convert to the iPhone after years of being on Android. If you're on Android, if you've got, I think, one of the latest Google Pixel phones or one of the Samsung, one of the more kind of popular Android phones, I think it's very similar, if not the same, in terms of what the settings are, because you can get Apple Music on Android. I don't know if you knew that, Lidge, but
no, because I haven't had an Android in many years, but
yeah,
that's good to know. Yeah, I mean, again, if it needs to be in all these places for consumers to give a shit,
Right. It really does. It really does. And I will say this, there's going to be there's going to be a contingent of people out there who have heard bad Atmos mixes, and unfortunately they do exist. But to me, it's like some of the people will say, oh, I've heard it. It sounds terrible. I'm not going to get involved, or I don't care about that. It's kind of like the equivalent of saying, oh, I had some bad Chinese food the first time I tried it, therefore I'm never going to eat Chinese food again. It's like, really? Come on,
you need to go to the
try
right
a different
Chinese
restaurant, try a different recipe. You know, like I think kind of cutting it off and making a declaration like that is just so extreme. And in audio and something that we're creative in, I think you have to be a little more open and, you know, try different scenarios and see if things improve.
Yeah, I think the exact same thing applies to the styles of music that are out there too. It's very easy to dismiss an entire musical movement because you heard a version of a song you just didn't like. And if you keep your mind a little more open, you know, you can begin to discover, wow, there's really something artistic and creative going on over here in this other style of music. I just needed to find the versions of it that were really worth listening to. One thing I would point out that confused me at first when I was trying to do that stereo to Atmos comparison in my AirPod Pros was that I hadn't checked the sound check button.
Mm-hmm.
And so in certain instances, the stereo mix was just so much louder than the Atmos mix that it just didn't give me a realistic comparison, because it's sort of impossible for us as rock musicians to say no to the thing that's louder. It's really hard to say no to the thing that's louder, you know?
It's so
but
quiet.
Once you level match them, then I heard it and it was like, oh, now I get it. Now the Atmos is adding this element of space and fullness of sound and stuff. So just a reminder, Rockstars, if you are doing the comparison, make sure you turn on the sound check button, which is the level match.
And the reason for that is because in Atmos, we cannot surpass a certain level. Right. And the reason for that, and I may get the minor details of this wrong, and my good friends, like my friend Justin Gray and Steve Genowick, who have been doing Atmos far longer than I have, who are brilliant at it, might correct me. But when you take all those 12 channels and then you fold them down to a binaural mix or an Apple Spatial mix, the volume's inevitably going to increase. So if you already make an Atmos mix that's already hot coming out of the gate, and then you collapse it down, it's just going to escalate and get even hotter, and probably make the converters on a phone, for example, completely distort. So, you know, I have a friend, a fellow Atmos engineer in Chicago, Matt Hennessy, and Matt has said before to me, you know, if Apple would just take the sound check feature and just hide it, and just keep it on all the time, it probably would eliminate a little bit of confusion.
Yeah.
And I would agree. It's like, just, you know, have it all be an equal volume there, and not leave the consumer to worry about so many decisions. Because, you know, while those who listen to Recording Studio Rockstars and Working Class Audio, they can figure this stuff out. But
they're super geniuses, Matt. I just wanted to make sure you were
that's
aware
right.
of that.
They're rock stars.
That's right.
But the average person, you know, who's not into it as much as all of us and all of our listeners are, they're going to be like, what is this? Oh, am I supposed to have that on? What is sound check? You know, and it just leads down a whole rabbit hole. So I think the more you simplify it in those areas, I think it's better for the consumer in the end.
I am really impressed with Isotope Ozone. I've been mastering many of my records recently, and Ozone makes it so easy to get a fantastic sound. The built-in mastering assistant helps by analyzing the mix and suggesting all the settings needed for a professionally mastered result based on the genre and EQ curve of your choice. You can even reference a specific song if you want, using simple yet sophisticated modules like clarity, impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting. You just adjust the settings to your taste and it sounds incredible. And the magic of master rebalance means you can manipulate the level of the vocal, bass, and drums even at the mastering stage. Amazing. My bandmates are pretty demanding, but now when I send off the masters for approval, they absolutely love the way our records sound thanks to iZotope. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Ozone or other tools like RX and Voice Enhancement Assistant, or grab any of the cool free plugins like the new Trash Lite at iZotope.com. It reminds me of a record I was doing when I first built my home studio here. This artist out of Dayton, Ohio, Jane Sachs, and she was down here. I used to love working with her. She was like my Alanis Morissette that I got to work with, because she just had that kind of, her music reminded me of that direction a little bit. But I remember mixing, and I'm all super nerding out, the engineer and me, and I'm tweaking and mix, and she's sitting behind me, and she's just like wondering what the hell I'm doing, probably, 8 of the 10 hours a day that I'm doing it. And then I'm playing her, so I'm like, what do you think about the tambourine there? And do you like this? Or do you like that? And I think I'm making a big difference. And she just squinting and looking at she's like, Lidge, I'm really sorry. I can't hear any difference at all in those two things. And I realized at the time, I was like, okay, all right. It's a me problem. The rest of the world is just trying to enjoy some music, and like these subtle things that we think make such a big difference. Sometimes they're just like, what the hell are you talking about? So it's a good reminder as we go through this stuff. As you said, Matt, we love nerding out on all these details and trying to figure it out. But people who are just trying to enjoy music are just like press and play, and it better sound good. It better feel right.
Right. It better feel right. At the end of the day, if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't really matter.
So here's a question for you about the Atmos versus stereo. If we've spent a long time trying to understand how to get stuff to sound good out of two pairs of speakers, or one pair of speakers, sorry. I'm not going back to quad by accident. Out of one pair of speakers, so in stereo, you learn a lot of techniques. You learn some particular ones like making everything work together in the compression, side chain interaction on compression and stuff like that. What elements of things that are cool tricks in stereo can you carry over into Atmos mixing? And what have you discovered are things you might have to just let go of? And then beyond that, what are some things that you've discovered in Atmos where you're like, whoa, this is cool that you can do that. You never could do that in stereo.
Well, I think mixing stereo and Atmos simultaneously with this current record I'm working on, it's really brought about, I'll be sitting there with the client, we're listening to the stereo mix, and we're like, okay, that's cool. And then you pop it out into Atmos and you're like, oh, wow, that's so much cooler. We can now hear there's, that one part or guitar or vocal part that's now we really can finally hear that. We can't really hear it as well in stereo because we're filling up, two speakers with as much firepower as we can, and we're losing detail and clarity in the process. Now,
things get masked,
That's it.
Also,
there's a lot of masking. So something that is plainly heard in Atmos coming out of the, the right side speaker or the rear left speaker or whatever will go kind of unnoticed in stereo a bit.
Well, it's interesting when I think about the idea of masking. So Rockstars, masking is, we're going back to the whole Fletcher-Munson curve, kind of science of sound. There's masking that happens between two sounds that are both playing next to each other physically in our space. I think you could have masking between two instruments that are just side by side playing sound toward you. But then you also have masking. There must be masking in representing those sounds through a speaker cone. So for example, when you're mixing music together and it's coming out of two speakers, Now, let's just pick the left speaker for a second. Now that left speaker is trying to play you two sounds at once, and those two sounds might be telling the speaker, one sound's telling the speaker, hey, go this way, and the other sound might be telling the speaker, no, go this way, And so they might actually be physically fighting each other, trying to get reproduced out of a speaker to come to your ear. And if that's the case, then now moving a sound over to the left speaker or the side speaker, all of a sudden the speaker is free to move in different ways, which must be a part of why the sound can sort of open up to you as you begin to surround yourself with speakers. It's much more like just having performers in different locations around your head.
Yeah, and there's different ways and techniques of mixing in Atmos and then collapsing that down to stereo. So, the way I'm working, like I'll pretty much everything I do and I'm working is so similar to my old stereo way of working. There's just more speakers. And, I've heard some very, let's just say some very accomplished people tell the world on social media that you cannot do both, which I disagree with because I'm doing it. So there's
take that. Take that, you haters.
So take that, haters. No. It's just, some people who have said, oh, it's not possible. Well, it is possible and I'm doing it. And I don't know how it's impossible, but clearly we're thinking of it in different ways, and that's okay. But what I find is like, I'll open up, I'll have my Atmos template, I'll bring in the audio, start with everything in the left and the right, and then I start moving stuff around. And all the while I'm constantly checking on stereo. It's like, oh, well, what does it sound like in stereo if I move it to the ceiling or the rear? Like, how does that affect its placement in the stereo mix? So it's a constant back and forth. And as I said before, it really reveals details that I think improve the stereo, but also improve the Atmos at the same time, because the decisions you make, to accommodate the stereo seem to benefit the Atmos and vice versa. There's a jazz record in there that I did from this young group of musicians, the Room 219 combo.
Yeah, it's really, really, really great sounding, man.
It's, I have to say that, I think that's the first, well, no, I mean, technically the Green Day was the first one, but the real, a full record that I did in stereo and Atmos, and it sounds great to me in all those formats. It seamlessly blends between all of them. And I don't know, I think the way I'm working allows for all those stereo techniques to still be in incorporated. Like, some say, well, you can't do bus compression. It's like, well, yeah, you can. I don't know how you're looking at it, but the way I'm looking at it, I'm not only am I doing bus compression, I'm doing parallel compression, and I don't have a stereo bus. I have a 714 bus, and that's got all the same things that my stereo bus had, except there's more channels. So it's confusing to me. There's a lot awesome. A lot of misinformation out there from people, I think, that have read or done a cursory glance at things, but they haven't really dove in to say, can I do this? And I'm one of those people that has dove in, and I can tell you with great certainty, and the proof is in the marketplace where those records are out, you can mix stereo and Atmos simultaneously.
That's very cool, man. And, it makes me think of, early audio, or just that there's always an early chapter to every chapter of audio. So there was like early, vinyl, there was early tape, there was early analog recordings, there was early digital recordings. And this is just sort of early Atmos immersive. So there's always people out there that are inventing the different aspects of what become taken for granted later. So it's not too much of a surprise for me that you might have invented a great way to mix both in Atmos and stereo and get it to work. And it's
I wouldn't
deeper
even go
than
there.
I know all the right questions to ask yet, because I'm not mixing in Atmos myself. But
I wouldn't say that I've invented it. I think I just kind of stumbled upon like what's possible. I think there's some of my friends who I need to give credit to, like Steve Genowick and Justin Gray in particular, who came before me and taught me, a lot about Atmos. So Although I seem to be one of the voices currently, as a recording of this, of pressing forward with stereo and Atmos. So I don't know.
Absolutely. Well, we got much more to say about you being a voice of Atmos too, but let's stay on the Room 219 project for a moment because it's really cool and there's a great story to it, I think. So this was actually a high school jazz band that you were able to record, right? And tell us a little bit about how you went to record it. So this is a project where you were able to record it yourself on location, knowing that it was going to be doing this stereo and Atmos mix and you were going to be able to see it all the way through. So I think this is a cool one for you to talk about all the decisions you made all the way through that.
Right. Okay. So I was approached by the parents of these high schoolers. One of them wasn't in high school. He was a freshman in college, but approached to say, hey, these guys have been playing together. I had seen them play in public, and it was, vibes, drums, piano, and Moog. No upright bass player. And the first time I saw them, I was like, wow, these guys are really good. A bass player. Wait, where's the bass player? And then I look around, and it took me a minute to realize there's no bass player. That guy's playing a Moog. That's where all the bass sounds are coming from. Holy
really?
crap.
Wow.
So that was my exposure to them. The parents reached out to me and said, hey, look, these guys eventually are all going to go their separate ways. Tommy, the drummer, is already going to UCLA. He's going to be leaving town. We really want to get a great recording of these guys and, kind of have limited budget. And I just looked at the situation. I said, okay, look, pay me a small fee and I will facilitate the whole thing, but I'll put the record out. And I will financially participate in whatever proceeds come from that record. So we got everybody on the same page, got all the parents to agree, all the kids to agree. So we set it up. So I borrowed two 8-channel Grace mic pre's, and I took two laptops and a Cali Audio ultra near field, a UNF system, and a bunch of mics to their high school, where coincidentally, both of my kids go to high school. So we set up in the band room. We make a deal with the band director. I set up in the band director's office, make that into a control room. And I had the two, well, before I get into that, I'm in the band director's office, and the whole band is out playing live, next to each other. They could see each other. They're standing right next to each other. I mic everything up. I mic the room up, knowing that we're going to be in Atmos, thinking, okay, well, that's going to be the ceiling. That's going to be the rear speakers. We're going to represent this whole room and the players. So I get all that set up. That all feeds into the Grace mic pre's. The Grace mic pre's I put together a little Dante network. So what that means, listeners, is basically I can take the 16 channels coming in, and I can split it between two laptops, one being my primary laptop, one being my backup in case something happens.
Oh,
The primary machine is my M2 laptop running Pro Tools, and my secondary machine is an old 2012 MacBook Pro Intel running Reaper. So I'm running two different DAWs.
How did you split it?
With Dante. So the output of the mic pre's is going to Dante. It feeds the two laptops over the Dante network over a piece of software. Each one is running called Dante Virtual Sound Card. Okay. It's kind of it's a lower cost way to get about 32 channels of digital audio into your DAW, whether you're on Reaper or Pro Tools, doesn't matter.
So if the mic pre decided to quit, you can't really back that up. But if more likely one of the computers, all being a laptop as well, says, oops, I stopped recording. Sorry. Can you start me again?
Right.
Before you put your fist through the screen of that laptop, you can breathe a sigh of relief because you got a second one running.
And with all due respect to Avid, I was planning on Pro Tools crashing. So I was like, well, I'm going to have Reaper running on the other machine. That never happened. There were no crashes. Both machines ran perfectly well. And it gave me peace of mind to just hit record on both machines. In fact, I just let the Reaper machine run the whole time. There's probably a gazillion gigs of audio in there I still have yet to take off. So yeah, split it between the two. And then no headphones. Guys are listening to themselves in the room, balancing themselves to the room. And there it was. We did it all in a day. I took it back and mixed it for several weeks, doing some experiments, trying my theories out on stereo and Atmos, and eventually sending mixes to everybody. And mix revisions were minimal. In fact, there was only one set of mix revisions. It was just like, yeah, it sounds great. Turn the bass up.
Nice.
And then
turn the bass up. Turn that Moog up.
Turn that Moog up. Turn that up. Send it out. And they were like, we love it. I made the record cover. I put it out in the world on all the streaming services. And then I did a deal with Immersive Audio Album where audiophiles can buy a download of the record in a particular format that probably only they will understand.
Do you feel like all the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for a simple, straightforward, step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your mixing struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mix system from Grammy-winning mixer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix from your home studio that will sound amazing everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. Quote, absolutely the most informative and helpful block of information and mentoring on the mixing process I've ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Close quote. Look, I'm so confident that the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass will take your mixes to the next level that if you can't get a killer mix within 30 days, I'll give you a full refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the Ultimate Snare Mixing Trick, and I'll save a seat for you at the front row table at the Grammys. So that's cool. So let's talk about that again in just a moment. But let me back up to the beginning, which is kind of an exciting part for us, which is this concept of if you're recording now with the intention of this is going to end up in an Atmos mix, can you be a little more specific about what mics you chose and what decisions you made, and like where did they go in a room? And describe how the band was arranged in that space so we can sort of visualize the staging of this recording.
They were kind of set up in a, I guess in a square, imagine 4 corners of a square, and, top right corner of the square is the drums, bass is on the top left corner, and vibes are on the bottom left corner, and piano's on the bottom right corner.
So sort of as if they're playing to each other, not as if they're on a stage playing out to an audience.
Right. They're all kind of looking at each other. They're facing inward, looking at each other in a square formation. And then I can't even remember what all the mics were, but a bunch of small diaphragm condensers placed around the room.
When you thought about the configuration of that square, did you visualize the stereo image and where you were going to pan things in your mix already at the beginning?
No. As a matter of fact, I showed up and I just kind of looked around the room and went, okay, Tommy, why don't you set the drums up there? And Spencer, why don't you put the vibes over there? And, Nate on bass over here, and Lucas on piano. It's an upright piano. There was a grand piano that was parked on a stage in a different spot in the school. There was like a little confusion about doors that could get open to get that piano. So we just said, screw it, let's just take the upright. So we grabbed the upright, spun it around, put a couple condensers on there. And
now what about the room mics? How did you decide what room mics would be useful in an Atmos mix?
Well, let's see. I looked at it from a speaker positioning standpoint. So I was like, okay, well, I need mics on the sides, and I need mics in the rear. And I need mics in the ceiling. So I just moved mics around, and knew that, I could hear the mics and it was in stereo as I was listening. So I really just had those mics turned down. I just made sure the signal was good and clean and
That's interesting. It's like my first question in my brain was like, how do you hear it in Atmos and headphones while you're working? But then as you point out, you hear it in stereo. And as you pointed out earlier, this is going to fall down to stereo anyway. So whatever decision you make, it better sound okay in stereo or you're not going to end up using it, right?
Yeah. I mean, there are ways in which you can monitor in a surround format straight out of Pro Tools, even before Atmos came on the scene. But now you could do it. You couldn't run it through the Dolby encoding and all that. And it's a deeper conversation. But here we are on location with a small rig, so I couldn't really do that. So I just set it up in stereo, made sure all the mics were clean, made sure the instruments sounded great. And then when I got home, I started to, populate the mix template and listen and go, okay, that's nice. The rear of the room. Now we have some depth. We have, the drums are in front of me, but I can hear reflections of the room behind me and to the side. And, there's the ceiling. And when you hear it in Atmos, it just sounds really, really beautiful to me. And even if you hear it on headphones in Atmos, there's a feature like if you're on I'm just going to go to my iPhone. So if I'm on my home screen and I pull down to get, to the headphone settings, you can go in and you can turn on head tracking.
Right.
If you turn head tracking on and listen to those mixes and you turn your head, you can, the perspective will change and you'll start to hear the room a little differently. The head tracking's a little goofy on.
I hate it for music. I love it for video watching because it's because you're thinking of the video as being in front of you, so it sort of follows it. But in music, I'm always like moving my head around. But it's fun to move around and experience it a little bit,
Well, in most pop music, I don't like it. But in jazz, in this particular case, where there's so much bleed and continuity between all of these microphones in this one single space, it doesn't sound as goofy as it does in pop music where, now I'm looking at the guitar. It's just like, I'm looking at Spencer over here on the vibes. And now I turn over here. There's Tommy on the drums. And it's a little more interactive in that way. And I sent it to my friend at Apple, Kerry Thomas, who's head of spatial audio there. And he said, "Oh my gosh!" And head tracking on the new goggle thing that they make, whatever the VR headset is, and he said it's just beautiful. Just
That's
listening to
awesome.
that space.
That's awesome, and it'll be really fun too at the point at which there's a visual that accompanies that too. Some kind of 3D camera where as you turn, you see them in those positions, and you can just sort of enjoy it. I'm sure with the Apple Vision Pros and the future of that kind of stuff. That's all coming. It's all coming, and it's only going to get better.
Or it's going to get more complex and piss everybody off.
It's all right. Well, it'll just give us brainiacs something to do.
Yeah.
We, like I said, we're all super nerds, and we love learning how to figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
And that's why we enjoy it. I think it's part of it. But let me ask you this. So, I think we have an opportunity now, even for those of us who aren't mixing in Atmos yet, but are maybe recording something and thinking, you know what, I want to future-proof this a little bit.
Yeah, good point.
If let's just say we're recording drums, because that's the thing we're all familiar with. We're used to the idea of room mics with the drums and getting a sound that works. But we think about that in stereo. So if we started thinking about a drum kit, if you went in and you were like, I'm going to record a rock drum kit in Atmos ready. Let's just imagine that you were doing that Devo session again and recording yourself on drums, and you're thinking, I want to have drum room mics that make sense for the overhead speakers. I want to have ones that make sense for the back speakers and the sides. How might you think about the room mics and the configuration? I don't want to put you too on the spot because maybe you haven't done this 50 times yet to know
No,
the
no,
perfect
no. But
configuration?
I have an answer for sure.
Yeah, tell us.
So here's the thing to consider, and this emanates from my experience listening to Tom Petty's Wildflowers album in Atmos, which my good friend Ryan Ollier mixed, and it was the inspiration for me to kind of think about the space of an Atmos mix. So let's say you're recording drums, and regardless of whether you're mixing Atmos or not, when you record drums, typically in stereo, we have our close mics and we have our overheads, and we might have a mono room mic or a stereo room mic. One thing to think about is, for me personally, I like to have the drum kit view in front of me. But then what you could do is think in at least based on the amount of speakers available, just think, okay, we could put things in the left, center, right, but we can also put things on the sides. So you might want to think about side room mics, rear room mics, and then have those available. So if you're mixing in an Atmos or somebody else is, they can put those room mics to the sides and behind. And what you gain in that is the ability to immerse yourself in that room. So if you got a great drum room, you can feel that space.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that character of the space is what differentiates different recordings. A lot of recordings sound kind of the same. I'm a big proponent of drum samples, but if we're all using the same drum samples, things are going to start to sound the same. But we're all not using the same spaces, whether it's a band room or a garage or a rehearsal spot or, a traditional studio. If you place mics around the room to capture the drums, and that is what gets mixed in Atmos, then the listener starts to step into that space, and it starts to give air and movement to that presentation of that music.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
So that's a very simple example. You could carry it through to, let's say you're doing guitar overdubs. Maybe you have your close mic and maybe you have your room mic, and your room mic is going to complement what we hear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, room mics with guitars have always been a great idea. But I think, we always thought about them as, guitar is on the left and the room mic's over on the right. But in this case, maybe the guitar's in one of those front speakers, but the room mic is, maybe it's the side mic, or maybe it's the one behind you. But let me back up to the drums one more time, and let's stay on this with other overdubs. Maybe one question that comes into people's mind is, when I think about placing mics where the Atmos per speaker in the Atmos listening experience. So I think about side room mics, I think about rear room mics, I think about overhead mics. Is your inclination to think, let's put the mics to paint a picture of what the room is, and then the room is just going to come out of the Atmos speakers, and whether somebody's listening in a small Atmos space or a big, movie theater? Or do you think people's inclination is to picture where the speakers are in their Atmos room and then place a mic where that speaker would be? You know what I'm saying? Like, people might want to visualize this somehow.
I guess it doesn't really matter how you visualize it. We're all going to visualize it differently. I mean, I just knew what was available in the mixing. So in the Room 219 example, I was just thinking in terms of the speakers initially. But what it became clear, obviously, if you look at it from the listener standpoint, you start to hear the space.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's the better way to think about it, is you want to capture that space and present that space, because I think that character of a space adds to the emotional impact and the feel and the uniqueness of that music.
So when I think about side room mics, it occurs to me that if you're using Omni mics for your room mics, then you just can sort of space them where you want to, and they're going to pick up the sound coming at them from the drums. They're going to pick up the sound bouncing off different walls in that location. But if you were thinking about cardioid mics, now you might be faced with a question of like, well, my ear is hearing the side speaker, and that side speaker is representing, maybe sounds bouncing off the wall over there. So maybe I put the cardioid mic pointed out away from me towards that wall. So it's acting like my ear at that speaker or something. It's fascinating to think about this stuff. And I guess just like making stereo records, we're going to have to try a lot of shit. And then we're going to hear what people did and think, that sounds great. What'd you do?
I think the trick is just to try stuff, capture it. I mean, hard drive space is cheap. So put up a couple extra mics, label them what they are, what they're intended for, so that the person who ultimately mixes it will know, like, oh yeah, we could put this over on this speaker and this over on this speaker.
And Rockstars, just one more reminder. Since if you're in a Pro Tools session, I think this goes for a lot of the DAWs now, you can have, instead of just a stereo track for the stereo room mics, you could actually have like a multi-channel track that you're sending all your room mics to, so that your session doesn't look out unruly, but maybe all those room mics are just coming through one multi-channel track. Couldn't you, Matt?
I mean, sure, you could.
If you want to, if you needed to like keep things sort of condensed.
To each his own, how they organize is up to them. Whatever makes sense to you. I just think, labeling things for their intended purpose is probably ideal. Because if I get a session destined for Atmos and I get a bunch of, multiple room mics, I'm like, well, why are there 6 room mics, but none of them are labeled, or however many room mics it's going to be?
Yeah.
No, it just presents a lot of possibilities. And then what's beautiful about it is, I don't know how the Dolby renderer is doing this, but there's just something about how it all folds down for me that I find fascinating, that I can then, convert like all these multiple speakers down to this stereo thing when I'm done. And it just, maybe there's something in the algorithm of the Dolby renderer. I don't know. I'm about, as of this recording, I'm probably like 3 years into it. By the time this gets published, I'm about 3 years into it. So there's still a lot to learn, but it's just a different way of working and a different palette all the way around.
Well, it's very cool. And then Rockstars, I want to encourage you again to scroll down to the show notes and listen to the Apple Music playlist and go check out Room 219, because I think that one in particular demonstrates this, what we're talking about, from the decisions you make at recording right through to the Atmos surround, right through to the stereo fold down, and right through to how awesome Matt is. So
yeah, there's a song on that record it's the first song on the record. It's called Omicron, and it's a cover song. I can't remember who wrote it originally, but man, I put that on, and it makes musically just makes me smile. But when I hear it in Atmos, really I hear it on headphones a fair amount, because I'll put it on. This is one of the few records I honestly of my own that I work on or records I mix that I listen to on a regular basis. I take great joy in that record and the talent of those kids, or those young men, I should say. That song in particular, I think it'll make you smile. And I think that as you listen through the record and then you listen in Atmos on headphones or whatever, Atmos capable equipment you've got, I think it's really a pleasurable experience to hear it.
Yeah.
And to hear that space.
At the risk of sounding like we're talking about a kid's record from a high school, this is like some really high level music.
It really is, yeah.
And playing.
I've played that record for people.
Really, really top notch.
When I play that record for people and then I reveal, I'm like, these are high school students. They're like, no,
yeah,
you're full of it. And I'm like, no, seriously, these are high school students.
This is some high level shit. This podcast is proud to present Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you're ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I master my own records using nothing but plugins. Plus, I take you into a world-class mastering studio, Sterling Sound, to meet with Ryan Smith and hear how he professionally mastered my record, Skadoosh, for release to streaming platforms. That's the music you hear on this podcast, Rockstars. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free mixing course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads for you to practice mixing and even upload to your website if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy to get started now. We're about to get to the finish line here, but before we do, just say a couple more things about thinking about doing a project and releasing it intentionally through special channels like the Audiophiles site. I thought that was very cool when you talked about doing that. I mean, you said like, look, let's find a way to release this and, sell it and generate a split or whatever we want to do. And maybe it's not going to sell 1 million copies there, but maybe it will have a life that will survive and reimburse part of this whole process of making the record.
Yeah. I think what I'm trying to do as an audio professional these days is I'm constantly trying to rethink, like, how am I doing things? And am I just sticking to the old way of doing things? I've never been one who likes to live my life according to what everybody else wants me to do. So I'm always pushing back against shit, and it frustrates a lot of people, I'm sure, around me that tolerate my bullshit. But for this, I think what I'm thinking about is, okay, let's say, like, as I highlighted with Room 219, there wasn't a lot of money there, but there was an opportunity for me to have skin in the game. And that skin in the game came in the form of take a small fee, do this right, do it to the best of its ability, best it can be, and then go to these other channels to release it. So after I did that, just like with the Green Day thing, I figured out, oh yeah, I could mix stereo and Atmos simultaneously. Great idea. I'll do that on this record. With this record, I learned that this isn't just a one-off model. This could be a model for the future. I could come to an artist. Let's say I go to a club. Let's say I go to a club and I hear somebody that I think is brilliant, and I come to them and say, hey, look, I love what you're doing. I'd love to get involved in a record. Here is an economic model to make it work for you. They may say, well, I don't have 20 grand to make a record. I don't have, 5 figures. I've got $4,000 to $5,000 to do it all. Okay, great. You put that into the pile, and then I will put my time and effort into the pile too. And when we're done, let's release it together. And maybe you release it on the streaming services and you run that show, and I'll release it on this audiophile thing and I'll run that. And we'll figure out the split. There's a different economic model here. We don't just have to be recording engineers or audio professionals who, just try to live by the old rules. We can expand. We can be entrepreneurs. We can say, hey, I have these abilities, therefore I'm going to put them to use, but I also have the business sense to take this and put it in these other arenas to make some money for all of us. And I think that collaboration with the artist gets everybody involved who's in the project. Everybody who's going to financially benefit from the project. It could, maybe we put it out and it doesn't do anything, but it's not like we're pressing 1,000 CDs and then letting them sit in the garage like many independent bands did in the 90s, right? This is we can release it when we want. We can get it to these different platforms. And as new platforms come online, we can put it out to those. We're just moving digital files around, and we're moving it around with stereo and Atmos so we can cover all of our bases, and everybody can contribute and benefit from this model. So that's how I look at it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Hey, when you mentioned Green Day, it reminded me to ask you, if we're already figuring out how to listen to some Apple Music Atmos on our iPhones or iPads, and then we watch Bill Maher's show on HBO through iOS or macOS, do you know if we'd be able to hear the Atmos and hear stereo versus Atmos that way? I don't know if you have that switchability.
You know, I have yet to invest the money into a home setup for Atmos. There's just,
You just used it all in the studio. So.
I know. I put it all into the studio. So it's like, hey, honey, can we spend, $1,500 or a couple grand on this home system too? So the answer to your question is I don't know. And the second part of that is I need to figure that out. And I also need to get a home setup that is more geared around my television because, that's where I think back to the Atmos thing in general. I think a lot of people are going to they spend time in front of their televisions and they spend time in their cars. Obviously, they spend time in headphones too. But I think that when you're mixing, you want to think about that. Somebody's going to be sitting on a couch with a sound bar and a couple rear speakers behind them. Maybe your mixing decisions will lend itself towards that.
Yeah.
And the driver and the passengers are a captive audience. They're going to be sitting in a regular spot. So those are some considerations.
Awesome. Well, Matt, we really appreciate you being on the show with us again, man. I always love seeing you. I got one more closing question for you. This is one you've answered twice before, but we're going to hit you one more time because 3 is a magic number. And this one is hypothetical. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine and you get to go back and find younger Matt. And maybe you're going way back, or maybe you're just going back to Matt before you set up your Atmos studio. And you say, listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself. What advice do you feel like you would like to go back and give to yourself, Matt?
I probably would go back to the beginning and just say, before you, like if I could get in a time machine and go back, I would tell that version of myself, I would say, look, you need to be fearless. You need to keep your eyes on the horizon. Avoid these formats and pay attention to this format. And don't be afraid to try new things in the world of audio, because those that have traditionally thrown a tantrum and I'm not going to get into stereo. I'm not going to get into Pro Tools. I'm not going to get into Atmos. Those people get left behind and those people stagnate. And that's, to me, it's a red flag of a bigger problem of not being open-minded to what the possibilities of creativity could be. So, don't let the dogma of tradition hold you back. If you see something on the horizon you think is kind of cool, particular technology, investigate, find out, see if it works for you. If it doesn't, fine, abandon it. If it does, it's fun to be early in on the party. And I'm part of a group of other Atmos mix engineers, many of who've been on both of our shows and many who are well known. And I really treasure that group because it's a group of people who are like-minded, who think ahead, who are not afraid to try new things in the world of audio.
Yeah.
And surrounding myself with that kind of mindset of people, much like the mindset of our mastermind group, Lidge, to me, that's important. I don't want to be that. I would tell my younger self, hey, don't be like the old man audio guy cliche. Don't be the grumpy dick who like poo-poos everything. Oh, it's never going to work. That's
old
quad.
Man yells at mixing cloud.
Exactly. Well, I'm never going to put my stuff in the cloud. I'm not, it's like the whole line of people like that. It's like, well, we've always done it like this. It's going to work like this. It's like, really? What if the Beatles had thought like that in those right?
Yeah,
we wouldn't have the adventurous records that we all to this day listen to.
Speaking of the Beatles, and speaking of Steve Genowick, it was that thinking outside of the box that brought the last John Lennon song back to us recently, where Steve got to talk about doing the strings for it and everything like that.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of the Beatles, Giles Martin has been, with the help of Peter Jackson, going back and remixing a lot of the stuff in Atmos, which is, it's a whole new way to experience the Beatles.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
So again, just to reiterate the interaction that you've done, Matt, with other Atmos mixers, Rockstars, I want to give, a double shout out to Matt here, because Matt has put together at NAMM, he's put together an entire panel of Atmos mixers to share all this great information with us. Folks like Andrew Sheps, Steve Genowick,
Bob Clearmountain, Dave Way, Will Kennedy.
Yeah, amazing group of people. So it was really, really great of you to do that. And that's all you, Matt, putting that together, getting everybody together. And then more recently doing the same thing, doing interviews with Andrew and Chad. And I think that came out on your podcast already, perhaps. So maybe you want to even give a shout out to that episode?
That wasn't, are you talking about the NAMM episodes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Chad wasn't on that. Chad was in the audience.
Oh, he was in the audience. Oh, okay. It was just Andrew. Okay, great.
Yeah. We did an episode with Brad Wood and Steve Genowick talking about, Atmos. And then Andrew and I did another, a separate interview that touched on Atmos, but talked about kind of more broader picture things as well.
Awesome. Well, Rockstars, again, I encourage you to go check out Working Class Audio. There will be a link in the show notes. Matt, where else should the Rockstars go? What if they want to just come learn from you, listen to your podcast? What if they just want to make an amazing Atmos mix for their next record?
I would say, probably seek out information from, there's a couple people online that you should pay attention to. Justin Gray is one of them. Justin is one of the smartest people I know out there doing Atmos. He's really a thoughtful person. He's very intelligent. Plus he's Canadian, so he's extra nice. And then Steve Genowick. Steve's done some stuff on Mix with the Masters with Kerry Thomas, who I mentioned earlier. Kerry used to work for Dolby. Now he works for Apple. So pay attention to what Steve does. Anything Andrew does, pay attention to.
What if they just want you to mix it?
Oh, you can just reach out and talk to me, and we can facilitate any kind of arrangement that you need to make an Atmos mix.
How would you like them to find you?
Go to mattboudreau.com, mattboudreau.com. Or if you get lost, you can always just go to workingclassaudio.com and look at the crew page there, and there is a link to me. So
awesome. I think you're also active on Instagram, and even for those who are on LinkedIn, they can find you there, right?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram like fucking crazy.
Well, it's great to hang with you, dude. I think we need to do another episode. Maybe next time, Rockstars, let us know if Matt and I should just talk about podcasting and like how to do a podcast, because we were geeking out on that before.
I think the two of us know a thing or two about making a podcast.
Yeah, we'd probably have lots of little tips and tricks to share. And it'd be great because they'd be in two different directions. Like they'd converge in some ways, and in other ways you'd be like, I don't do it like that. I do it like this,
Yeah. We could compare notes.
Exactly.
How do you do it? I do it like this.
Well, Matt, thanks for hanging, dude. And, Rockstar's full reveal. I'm going to see Matt tomorrow morning. So
I'm going to see you tomorrow. I'll be up at 5:45 to meet you by 6.
That sounds awesome. Rockstars, thanks for listening. Matt, thanks for being on the show, dude.
Great to see you, Lidge. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible. Grace Design, Atom Audio, Native Instruments, and Isotope. And remember, at isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes because it's a great way to help support this show. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.